Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
And today we're talking about villains. How to make a good, or a decent anyway, RPG villain for your game. So villains are pretty important to your game usually. They are what fuel your players' characters.
Why are they what fuel them?
Well, fuel them to do something other than just go kill monsters and take their stuff. We nickname him the big bad guy, right? Because I think that's probably named after the term used in video games, but it's transferred back to RPGs. The idea of that there's this villain that is recurring probably to the PCs, the player characters, and he or it, her, whatever, moves the game along, right? That usually, it doesn't have, every session doesn't have to be about catching the villain or getting him, but
you'd have to have a lot of villains if it was.
Yes, yeah. In a campaign style game, it's good to have a reoccurring villain that advances along with the PCs and maybe is integral to the plot of the whole campaign, or at least takes a big part of it. I guess I'm trying to think of who the villain is in the campaign Storm King's Thunder. I don't remember. There was a couple major villains, right? A couple big adversaries, and
weren't they?
I guess at the very
weren't they giants?
Yeah, at the very end, exactly.
It was a giant, and it was a dragon who was pretending to be a giant.
Exactly. So it was pretty cool. That was a pretty good villain, and even though you don't see that villain until the very last chapter of the campaign, that villain was, the machinations were working, and you saw, or the players saw or dealt with whatever this villain was up to. And that's pretty tough to do in a long campaign, to set up a game like that. But for us, I think it's a little bit easier. We just follow some simple steps to making your villain not a cliche.
I think that's probably the hardest part, to not make them a cliche.
It is hard because it's like, I don't know who said it, but there's nothing new under the sun. Is it Shakespeare or some other writer or some philosopher? And it's very hard not to use something that you've either heard of or read or seen on a show or television or movie.
And it's okay to model your villains off of previous villains that you've seen or read about. Or
you have to, right? You take elements of them, but I think cliche is like, it's I don't know, I can't even think of a cliche villain.
Well, it's like the fact that the villain has no name, or they say, oh, what's his name, and you go, oh, Joe. You just make it up on the spot. No backstory, no reason to be there other than for your characters to
battle.
Yeah.
Right. I think I only listed like 3 things. I'm sure there's more, but just a quick, and then we'll talk about them a little bit more in depth. I like to think that the villains, like Jolene said, have real reasons for doing what they're doing. And one thing I came up with is a villain should not think that they're wrong. They don't even think they're crazy.
Well, maybe they're not crazy. Maybe they're just evil.
Well, yeah, sometimes villains they come across as being nuts, right? Because they probably, the GM hasn't formulated a reason for what the villain is doing.
So one of the things I put down that goes along with that is that you should give them a well-rounded backstory, a reason, making sure that and it doesn't have to be long or anything. Maybe just write a paragraph about so that you have an idea of who
Yes.
this person is.
Well, I wrote that same thing down. I said motives. There are reasons for why they are doing what they're doing. So yeah, and that has to do with background, because otherwise it's like they're just doing it for the sake of doing it and just to be a bad guy and for the characters to try to kill.
Which is fine. Like if you're playing a game where, I think of like a modern D&D game where the villain is a game where the villain is like a drug dealer or something, right?
Whoa.
And you are the agents who are supposed to arrest him or stop him from doing this, right?
I guess, yes, but a real true villain, we're talking like, the higher, see, that would be in the case that, let's say you're playing a detective story or investigative story, somebody murdered and the family wants to know who, and then the drug dealer would be like the low man on the totem pole. He wouldn't be
Maybe.
the villain. The real villain would be probably the person bringing in the drugs. Or if you want to get crazy, it's the drug cartel leader, Sancho Panza out there in Colombia or wherever they're at. And he's the real, or she is the real reason.
And why are they doing it?
And why they do it? Of course, they have reasons why. They want to be rich and make a lot of money. Or, something really,
Or they're going to go out, or they're going after somebody.
We just watched something like that, right? NCIS? It was a woman, though, the drug lady. But there was the tables were reversed. They're trying to kill her.
No, that wasn't NCIS. That was the Rookie.
Oh, that was the Rookie. I don't know. I get my.
But she was a good villain, right?
Yes, right. Because she's empathetic.
Yes, and that's what you want to do. She was a mother, and they ended up having to protect her son because someone was trying to kill her.
Right.
But she was this really, badass woman that would kill people.
Yeah, she was
get what she
ruthless.
wanted. She would do whatever she had to do.
I forget where she was from, but yes. So in that sense, they kind of turned the tables and they're like, well, I understand why she's doing what she's doing, even though she's doing some pretty heinous stuff, right?
Right. But that's the kind of thing you want to make your villain.
Yes.
You want to make because it's harder to it gives your players more dilemmas, right? What do you want to do?
Correct.
Right.
So another thing is, the longer the hate, the better the player's satisfaction will be when they defeat the big bad. So I got examples of all these guys in games that I played in the past. But I think the longer that if they keep this recurring guy, and he or she person doesn't have to really like be the main thing of the adventure of that particular stream. What is it? The part of the adventure, that
session,
or even that session. But if he comes in every once in a while and or his hand or some element of what he is doing appears, or the characters find out about it, saying, "Oh, it was Darius the Grey that was up behind this robbery," or whatever that they see signs of him or even glimpses of him. They as they finish this certain session and they defeat or overcome this latest obstacle, they see him either distantly, or he leaves a letter for them, or anything that ties. And they're like, that just really aggravates the players to really hate this character more. When the time comes to defeat him, however that is done, they really get satisfaction out of it. In my illustrious career as a GM, I've had a lot of luck. Sometimes you have players that will latch onto an NPC, and just by their wanting to interact with that NPC, and that NPC may not be a big bad guy
in your head at the time,
and the players just latch onto him, and then they really start disliking him for whatever reason. And sometimes it could be just imagined. They come up with their own stories in their head, and that's gold, right? That's as rare as gold when players really go after an NPC, and you're like, wow, they really don't like this person or this thing.
Well, there's in the campaign that we played, I think it I don't know if it was when we were doing the one you just mentioned about the king, the giant king,
Storm King's Thunder.
Remember that? I don't know if it was in that campaign or a different campaign when Ian decided that he was going to steal the wizard's pavilion. Was that that campaign?
Yes, that's actually before Storm King's Thunder.
Oh, okay, it was before Storm King's Thunder.
Yeah, but it's reoccurring.
So I don't know what we were doing, but he decided that he wanted to take the pavilion because it was this pavilion that you could put anything inside of it and close it up and take it with you and then open it up.
Yes. Well, I forgot how they figured out that this thing worked or was the way it was.
But he stole it, and then the wizard or sorcerer or whatever he was, this evil guy, wanted it back, and he goes, "I'm gonna kill you," and so he's been a reoccurring villain in our games.
One of them I was just about to mention. So in this case, I got lucky, right? He was a bad guy who was manipulating or encouraging orcs to rise against this human settlement. And so I don't know how he got into this. So I just came up with this idea. Oh, he has this pavilion, and they're like, well, how did he have all this stuff? Because he was a wizard, and so he needed all this stuff, like all kinds of components and stuff. And so I go, oh, I don't know. So they I forget how they. It's been so long. I mean, this is how reoccurring the villain he is. They find out that this pavilion is mad. I think
We saw it.
We saw him.
It, yeah.
He would say some magical word, and it would like fold up into itself into a nice small package. A pack, like a backpack size. And this was like a pavilion, one of those big circular ones you see in the, in all the movies. And another thing is they saw all kinds of things go into this pavilion. That they had chairs, they had stuff, and so they're like, whoa. So then at one point they were able to steal it. Honestly, I don't even remember how they did it. And so they stole it, and it turns out that this thing is like a portable hole, right? That kind of, it's obviously a really powerful magical artifact that with the word that they heard the magic user say, it opens up, and then it opens up into a large pavilion that could hold, like 20 people in it, and can sleep a whole bunch. Kind of became kind of a crazy thing that they used, because they use it to transport all kinds of things. Like
the boys bought these chairs for some reason. I don't know. We were in some town, and Saul said, "What do you want to do?" And Alan and Augustine came up with this idea of buying chairs.
I think because
they were going to rent them out to somebody.
Kathy was doing the performing thing, right?
That's right.
And so they go, well, is there enough chairs for the people coming in? Because she rolled really good on her performance check or whatever. And so it was drawing a lot of attention, and it was so much attention that this bar was full and people were standing. So then
I thought it was outside.
No, the first it was inside.
Okay.
And then no, you're right. It was inside, and then the guy goes, well, there's too many people. We should move it outside. So then they moved the show outside, and so people were standing watching this, and they're like, oh, do you want a chair? I'll rent you a chair to sit down in. And so
I think we had recently either gone to the Renaissance Fair or somewhere where there were no chairs and they had to stand up for the day. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I don't remember what it was. They were like around 9 or 10.
Yes, they were very young.
Yeah.
Well,
and they went with these.
So they wanted to make chairs, right? And they, and I forget which one of them. Probably Alan had a craft skill. So he's crafting all these chairs, and I'm like, okay. And then they go, what are you going to do with them? We go, we just put them in a pavilion. So they had, I forget how many chairs, 20 chairs?
At least.
And they would rent them. I'm like, nobody's going to rent a chair. And they're like, really? How long is Kathy's performance? Kathy's the player. I forget her name of the character. Savriel, yeah. And Savriel was like, she was like a former gladiator, so she put up this gladiatorial weapon use.
She used tridents.
Tridents and nets. Oh my god, I remember that now. And it was funny. But anyway, so they would put all these chairs into this pit.
So they used the pavilion to carry the chairs.
So it became a storage bin.
They also put living things in it and discovered that you couldn't put living things in it and close it. So that was it.
So it was pretty bad. That was pretty bad.
So anyway, the villain kept coming up and
he wants his goddamn
his pavilion back.
Hell yeah. And it was funny because at first they're like, what's wrong with this guy? I go, you guys stole it's something he crafted even, right? He had to craft because it's not in the book anywhere. And it was particularly, very powerful because, the players being players, they came up with all kinds of things they could stick in there. And, if there was something huge that they want to carry around, they're like, we'll stick it in a pavilion. I'm like, okay. So it became like a pain in the butt for me because, players would come up with good stuff, but it was nothing that I was going to take away from them. I haven't yet anyway. And actually the guy came looking for it twice, and twice he was defeated. So the third time I think he's going to be a little bit sneakier. So just a warning for you. So
that goes to the idea that giving the character to the villain, right? And he wasn't even the boss guy. He was just a
he was a hired gun.
Yeah,
he was a hired gun.
And when I was reading on this topic, I thought it was interesting. Somebody said if you give the villain a flaw, then that it'll make it more compelling and memorable.
Yes.
And one of the flaws that I thought about was you can make the villain so they wouldn't hurt any women.
Right.
females
They have some-
in your party.
They have some weird
Like because their mother got hurt, someone hurt their mother or something like that, and then you can. That makes it more interesting because there would be this villain that wouldn't fight any of the females and
or hurt them.
right? So that would make it that would make battling him more interesting because you could play with that, right? Your characters would figure it out, or your players would figure it out.
Maybe they could try, and I think that's a good thing when you give out information. You don't tell them, "Oh, he can't hurt women and children," simply by what he does. He targets the men when obviously a woman character is in front of him, or
especially since like in our group, a lot of the women are fighters, or even the guys play women, right? Ian's character is a female.
Is it? I forget.
Yeah, she's an elf.
Okay. I forget which one's which sometimes.
And Kathy plays this fighter.
She's a female.
She's also half elf. We got a lot of elves in our party.
Yeah.
And I play a sorceress in that group, and
yes.
And I often run forward because I know the boys will follow me.
So she's like the worst sorcerer you want in your group, because like we want to go this way. They're like, we're not sure about that. Then she goes off running. They're like, there we go. I guess we're going that way. That's how you move the story forward.
It is, but that comes from the fact that I've been playing with them since they were kids, right? And when they were kids, Steve and I were always trying to make them do, instead of just doing whatever they wanted to do, to try to get the story to move along. So a lot of times that meant one of us just going. And so I discovered that if I went, they would follow me so I didn't get hurt. Not a good idea, by the way.
So that's a good example of a slow burn, and it wasn't even planned, right? I didn't plan it, and that's a little bit of gold that the players latch onto, or they kind of made me make him a recurring character because they stole his tent, right? His pavilion, and so I'm like, yeah, he's gonna want it back. That thing's freaking
because he's a wizard,
and and he had his stuff in there, and I'm like, yeah, he's not gonna like, oh yeah, you know what, it's okay.
They can have it.
It's worth 100,000 gold, and it took 3 years for me to make. It's okay.
It's yours now.
Took 2 years of my essence to deal with that. So that's really a cool thing that happened when he came back and tried to kill him and try to take it. He wasn't dumb enough to get himself in a situation where he's gonna get killed or caught. So he would do stuff and get away. And lately he hasn't showed up, though. They think he had something to do with one of the last missions they went on, but that I ran, and but it wasn't for sure. But that's cool, So when he shows up, I think they have his name finally, but they didn't have his name. They call him the wizard or the pavilion guy, pavilion guy. So that's pretty cool. I think that worked out in my easily for me, and like I said, having them recurring. And when they finally defeat him and get rid of him for good, I think they're all gonna high five each other and be really happy with this. With however they defeat him. So having the villain not think that or not believe that he's crazy or in the wrong is probably another good element of a villain.
My example of that is, and Saul and I talked about this, and he said, well, he does kind of think he's crazy. The Joker.
Oh yes.
And I read about it. I don't like the Joker myself, but
you don't like the character.
He is insane. He's a good idea, a good example of an insane bad guy, right?
Right.
Because you don't know what he's gonna do.
Yeah, he has. Well, yeah, I don't know. I think. He is crazy, right? So he'll
right.
just do whatever, and the crazier he is, the thing is with the way crazy people or villains are portrayed is, especially like the Joker, is you can't count on him to do certain things. Right.
There might be a plan, but
yes,
he's not going to go with it.
Yes, and they love, altering the plan.
Yeah.
Right. So that's cool. Yeah, and I don't know, I think the Joker character is probably a pretty tough, not for me, it would be pretty tough to play because he's just so
chaotic.
Yes, chaotic is a good version. Good.
But you could base your bad guy on somebody else, like with those, like an insane person, right?
Right.
Or he doesn't know he's insane, or he does know he's insane. But you need to give them a. I mean, it gives it a kind of an idea of, especially if you use something that's, I hate to use the word trope, but if you use something that people will know,
Right.
it will make it a little more real for them, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying everybody knows crazy people, but they've seen the movies and stuff. So
Oh yeah, they've seen people portrayed as nuts. Yeah, I was gonna say an example of this is I had a character a long time ago. I was running space opera, and it was but the characters were in charge of a space station. They were in charge of a security. They had just left the military, and the characters were in charge of the security of the whole base. And so the characters were. I ran this at convention, so there was between 6 and 8 characters players kept playing. So they had plenty of people to, and they weren't the actual security grunts. They were like the consultants, right? They often did stuff for went on all kinds of different weird missions. But in this current mission or adventure that I ran, they were space opera has like imagine 1980 nations in space, right? Because it was made in 1980, so there was the idea of like the United Federation up there in space, and then that was kind of patterned after the United States, and then they had the GPR, which kind of after Russia kind of thing. Anyway, and but there was one bad guys that were patterned after, I would say, Nazi Germany, because they were they were xenophobic. They had this idea of pure human stuff. So they literally didn't like aliens, right? And almost all the player characters in my game were alien of some sort. There was, and space opera was like had all kinds of different types of races. There was cat people, dog people, Wookiees, but they were like more Ursoid, so they were more bear-like than whatever Wookiee is. And anyway, so they were in charge of the security space station, and it's because it was a space station that was out, kind of like Babylon 5, right? It was supposed to be like a neutral area, so they were hosting some sort of political gathering, and one of the political people was this from the Azuriac Empire, which is this bad guys. They're pro, pure strain humans and all this BS, and they're particularly nasty people. But so this guy shows up, I forgot his name, and they hate him as soon as he gets off the ship, right? Because they're told we have to guarantee this guy's safety because he's on diplomatic immunity and all that crap. So they would like to scan his packages, right, his luggage, and he goes, no, I'm not allowed to because of diplomatic immunity. So like they gnash their teeth, the player characters, and so they go, and so they there was two things going on, right? There was that guy was on the station, and he wasn't crazy, but he knew he was right. He knew that his way was the best way, and so he was very arrogant. And when he talked to human characters, he was very pleasant and very nice, and totally dismissive of any alien character. Right? Just why are you? He would say things like, "I requested human agents to be with me," or whatever. And of course, the players would like, "No, this is what you get." So they come across. So they're also in charge of this guy's safety, and so they uncover a plot to kill him, to assassinate him. And he's probably, I don't remember exactly who he worked for, but he was probably former military, like they were, and they were very sympathetic to that guy's cause because he wants to kill the guy from the Azuric Empire. I think his name was Lars Steele. I just wanted to make
that was the bad guy.
That was the bad guy. So I want to make some of this really ridiculous name. And if your name's Lars, I don't think it's ridiculous, but So they've uncovered this plot to kill him, and then they uncover that this ultimately this Lars Steele, this diplomat, had put a bomb on the ship. That was one of the things that they found out. So
on the space station,
on the space station, and he was intending on blowing it up. And of course, he made it look like it was some other world's type of bomb because they were able to scan it, and they figured out that it was like mimicking the technology of some other star nation. I forget which one it was. So they're really mad, right? But they can't divulge that they scan it because that would break the whole protocol and stuff. So at the very end, everything happens. They save the guy, and he's very thankful to the player characters for saving his life because some guy was trying to kill him, and of course he didn't thank the non-human ones, just the human counterparts. So what they did is they did the old switcheroo, right? The player characters, they put the bomb. They had the bomb, and what they did, it goes, well, and then they knew a bartender because there was like Quark's bar at the space station, and he had this big crate of like this wine or hard liquor, and and so they put the bomb in there, and they put a bunch of wine stuff, not wine, but the hard liquor on top, and then they go, well, here's a case of a crate of this really expensive old human, I think it was whiskey or something like that, single malt whiskey or something. And he's like, he opens the crate because he doesn't trust them, and he sees that there's bottles in it, and he thanks the player characters, and they're like, he right. And so as soon as the ship leaves the jurisdiction of the space station, they blow it up. They blow and I'm thinking, man, these guys are like brutal. But let me tell you, it was hilarious because it was like when that ship blew up, they were high fiving. It was like they erupted in like, they were so happy. They were just like, and that's what I'm talking about. This was like a slow burn, even though it wasn't a long campaign. It was a game that took like 7 hours at a con, and I was like, man, and they were like super happy. They were like literally high fiving each other about mission. Well, I mean, they just
because the bad guy was a bad guy.
Yeah,
right?
and
he was
everybody,
like a Nazi,
yeah,
guy,
he was a
right?
Nazi. Yeah, they even have some not Nazi emblem, but they had this. They really patterned after Nazi Germany. So the slow burn there was this guy was just, they hated him, and every interaction they had with him was just left a terrible taste in their mouth, and it was like he theoretically had done nothing wrong up until the fact that they found the bomb, but they hated him before they found the bomb, right? So when they found the bomb, they were absolutely ecstatic. They're like, we're gonna get this guy.
So he had the bomb, not the Lars guy.
No, Lars Steele had brought the bomb with him, and he was gonna blow up the base, and he was gonna leave it there and go. And then
he was the bad guy.
He was the bad guy.
The guy that was trying to kill him.
Well, no, there was two separate plots, right?
Okay.
There was a plot with a guy.
So Lars is the guy that was the Nazi guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that in your storytelling.
No, I'm sorry. I got to get a little excited. So there was those two separate plots. The one that was the assassination guy who was going to kill Lars.
The bad guy.
The real bad guy.
Right.
And so they were sympathetic
to
the
bad guy was going to blow up the space station,
yes.
but they put his bomb back on his thing and,
yes.
and blew him up. Well, that's kind of good, right?
They thought it was good.
I think it was good.
They were fair. So that's an example of a character who doesn't believe he's crazy. He obviously believes.
Well, he wasn't crazy. He was just evil.
Yeah, he just believes in his cause,
yes.
right? And they don't think they're wrong.
Well, right? He wasn't wrong in his opinion,
right? And then there's also the other guy who's trying to kill this Lars guy because he goes, this guy's
and since you don't like him, you might as well let him kill him, and he's
right,
the bad guy, right?
But their job was to protect them, right?
Yeah.
If he dies on their space station, it would have been bad.
Yeah.
So that's what the whole angle was. And then I had no idea. I didn't think about anything.
And you ran this game a few times, and they all did it differently.
No, that one I only ran once.
Actually,
I only ran once, and it turned out so good. I'm like, I can't run that game again because I don't know. Not sure.
It was too perfect.
It was too perfect.
No other characters would do the same thing.
No other players, right? And it was funny because it just ran. They just ran with it, right? When the bomb, I was thinking they were just going to defuse the bomb and get rid of it, right? Let this guy go.
Some of them might have done that, but not these people.
Not these guys. They wanted retribution of the worst kind.
Well, and that's one of the things I wrote down was making the villain, making it personal to the characters, having the threats of the villain be personal.
Yes,
and that is exactly what you did, right?
Right.
You made him rude to them, and
right,
and not even rude, just because he
believed.
Yeah. You don't even.
Why are you talking? And he would say that. He goes, "Why are you talking to me?" Which really got him upset. He goes, and then the person in charge of they were former military, right? A lot of people were like they wouldn't care about the structure of the military because they were civilians now. But a lot of them would say, "Oh, she's in charge, right? Because she was their sergeant or something like that." And so she was a cat person, right? And she was badass, and so she would be the one that was implementing all these ideas, and because they all referred to her, not all the time, but quite a bit. And so the character, the Lars Steele, the terrible diplomat, he would go, "Why am I talking to you?" He goes, "You're talking." And then that character, depending on who played her, they would like be not in that scenario, but in other scenarios, they would play her differently. Like some players wouldn't use the whole idea of the command structure. They would like ignore it, right? They would do whatever they wanted. Other players, groups of players, would always refer to the command structure, even though there wasn't any, because they were all equal.
But they were in the military together, right?
Yes, they were a unit,
and she was their leader.
She was their sergeant, right?
Yeah, so.
And so
you always fall back on that,
right? Well, these people
yeah.
did, and so they would always push. And then they did it on purpose, right? Because once they realized that this guy really hated anything alien, they would interact with him. Right, they would purposely send they would,
of course,
to antagonize him, and then it was really good. It was really well done. And like I said, I was expecting them just to defuse it, throw out the space lock or whatever.
That just goes to show you that players will never do what you're expecting them
Right.
to do. They'll come up with ideas that you would have never thought of.
And it was brilliant. It was brilliant because what happened was he brought some wine, right? That's what it was, and he goes, and he had put it in the bar with I think Magellan's Folly was the name of the bar, and he put it there. He goes, "Well, I only want to drink my wine, and that's all." But he never drank out of it. So they figured out that this guy had put this wine there, this case, like a large case, and like what, and then I forgot how they figured it out, but they figured out that it was there. Then like I said, then they took out the bomb, and then they put it in a different case of this, and from Magellan's Folly, and it worked out. And the guy's name was Rick, the bartender, the owner, and they loved it. I mean, it was like I said, I was expecting, which you shouldn't do as a GM, expecting them just to disarm the bomb and throw it away.
And I think that one of the other things that that story and that you should remember about villains that you created, don't get attached to them because they're there for your players to defeat, right?
Yes.
They're not there for you to play. I mean, you do kind of play them as an NPC, but just remember they're not you.
Right.
It's just the villain that you put out there for your players to destroy.
Right. That is a classical thing not to do, right? This idea where you protect your villain because you really like them or whatever, and you don't let something happen to them.
And I think that's why a lot of the GMs that I read when I was doing research for this,
yes,
was they said just write a paragraph. Don't become attached to them, but make sure they're fleshed out enough to entice the character players, and make sure that you have them well rounded enough. But they're not your character. Make sure you realize that as you're playing them.
Well, because Lars Steele was supposed to be a recurring bad guy, right? And that's what I was using him as, and then I was hoping to use him as, even though I was running this at cons and I wouldn't always have the same player over and over. I did have a lot of repeat players that would come back to my game a year later or at the next convention. So he was going to be a recurring bad guy, but that didn't happen because they blew him up. And I'm like, oh, for example, when I say you don't want to totally protect this bad guy against, impossible odds, right? Like when they blew up that ship, I wouldn't want to.
Oh, he lived.
He escaped.
There was an escape pod he got into. He realized there was a bomb.
There was something. Yeah, we wasn't really on the ship.
You might be tempted to do something like that because you put some effort into that bad guy. But just remember, he's there for the characters to defeat.
Right.
So just like a good author who writes a book and they catch the bad guy and they put him in prison or they kill him, right? Depending on.
Well, in this case, like you're right. You don't take that victory away from them.
Yeah, no.
There's only you might do it once.
And I think you would be more happy that your players figured out whatever it is and they took care of it.
Well, that's what it was, and I think I've talked about that session before, but that's probably been one of the funnest games I've ever ran, because as soon as they captured the bad guy, they're like, but we really want Lars Steele, right? He's the real bad guy. Yeah, we finished. We caught this guy, and I made him sympathetic to the guy because they had done ops, because they were like special forces, right? And this guy was they had worked with him before, but he had gone mercenary, and I guess they were kind of mercenary too, but they were like security.
Well, that's a good good kind of. So
Yeah.
you did the right things for your bad guys there.
Right, and I, like I said, I just expected them to disarm the bomb, but they really wanted to get that guy, and then they were coming.
That doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yes,
Role players are like that, right?
You'd hope so.
Especially if you give them a Nazi-like character that they're going that is the bad guy.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I would want to kill him too.
Yeah, not just let him get away with it.
No.
That was it. Is that they didn't want him to get away with it, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And they were just like I said, they just ran with this idea, and they were like, and I did too, because I was like, I had not thought of that. You know what they were planning. I'm like, because they're talking with each other about what they were doing. I'm going, oh my god, that's brilliant. That's fantastic. I couldn't have written that in. I couldn't have written that into the game. So I was like, and then I've told this before, but as a GM, that is something that is, to me, is what makes running a role playing game super fun. Is that when I'm on a ride and I have no idea what's going to happen, I really don't, and I'm hearing the machinations of the players, I'm like, wow, that's brilliant.
Well, yeah, because you've made this scenario and you've presented them with what's happening, and they go with it and do stuff that you weren't expecting them to do. So that makes it good when your bad guy is really bad, or and there's all kinds of things that are playing into it, right? And then the characters are going to come up with whatever they're going to come up with and defeat the bad guy, or he's going to get away and then they have to go after him again.
Right.
So I think that's probably, I don't know how else to explain making a villain other than that.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, the slow burn, I have a slow burn in this short 8 hour, basically it was supposed to run for 8 hours adventure, and then there's a slow burn with the campaign where the recurring wizard with the tent, with the pavilion. There's 2 separate lengths of time, but there's still slow burn, right? Because at the very beginning they hate this guy, and they hate him throughout the whole adventure and every interaction of those 8 hours that I'm running the game, and every interaction that they have with the pavilion guy is they don't like him either, even though he's really the one that has been damaged in this equation, except he was a bad guy to begin with, right? But he just wants his stuff back, and they don't want to give it back. So if this was a law of courts and laws, he could sue for his pavilion, and he probably win.
Yeah,
right? Because he goes, well, I made it. It has my
but these are a bunch of warriors and wizards and a fantasy world where he could sue all he wanted to, but they'd just kill him.
Right. Well,
if they could.
I'm just saying that if it was legally, he has a right to his stuff.
There you go.
And it doesn't matter if he was up to no shenanigans. It's it feels like the United States, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
If he was like a drug dealer,
but it's not. It's Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, if he was a drug dealer in the United States and you stole his car and he legally owned the car, they'd tell you, you know what, he's going to sue for the car back.
Depending on if it was the cops, because the cops would just take the car.
Well, they might, but if it was a private citizen, right? They're like,
yeah,
oh, he did me wrong. He sold drugs to my kid or something, so I'm gonna get back. So you steal his Rolls Royce, Silver Fox or whatever that thing is. That's worth $2 million. So they steal it, and he goes, I want my freaking. One, he'd probably kill you, but 2, he'd sue you. I think
he would kill you first before he sued you.
You might go the legal route, or she.
There you go. So good luck making your villains, and just remember to make them, personable
and memorable.
And memorable.
Yes.
And this is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.